how he has arrived at the position he is occupying. Act's subsequent silence about his fate, which can be pieced together only from extra-biblical sources, and to some extent seems to have been absorbed into the accounts both about the character we now call Stephen and even Jesus himself, obscures the situation still further. Once the New Testament reached its final form, the process of James' marginalization became more unconscious and inadvertent, but, in all events, it was one of the most successful rewrite or overwrite enterprises ever accomplished. James ended up ignored, an ephemeral figure on the margins of Christianity, known only to aficionados. But in the Jerusalem of his day, in the 40s to 60s CE, he was the most important and central figure of all, the bishop or overseer of the Jerusalem church. Designated as the brother of Jesus, James the Just or the Just One is often confused or juxtaposed, and this probably purposefully, with another James, designated by Scripture as James the brother of John, the so-called son of Zebedee, thus increasing his marginalization. This multiplication of like-named individuals in Scripture was often the result of the same rewrite or overwrite processes just remarked. There is a collateral aspect to this welter of like-named characters in the New Testament, even going so far as to include Mary, the sister of her own sister, Mary, John 19:25. These instances are all connected with downplaying the family of Jesus and writing it out of Scripture. This was necessary because of the developing doctrine of the supernatural Christ and the stories about his miraculous birth. James. The leader of the early church, or Jerusalem assembly, in Palestine from the 40s to the 60s, James met his death at the hands of a hostile establishment before the events that culminated in the uprising against Rome and the destruction of the Temple, 66 to 70 CE. To have been head or bishop of the Jerusalem church, ecclesia, or community, was to have been the head of the whole of Christianity, whatever this might be considered to have been in this period. Not only was the center at Jerusalem the principal one before the destruction of the Temple and the reputed flight of the Jamesian community to a city beyond the Jordan called Pella, but there were hardly any others of any importance. For instance, the famous center at Antioch in Syria, which may have been confused with the one at Edessa some 200 miles further east, was only just being formed in the 40s and 50s. All others, insofar as they existed at all, being in a nascent state only. According to Acts, Antioch was where Christians were first called Christians, 1126. It was the former capital of the Hellenized Seleucid kingdom, one of the offshoots of the empire of Alexander the Great, and the church there consisted mainly of Paul and several associates, including, it would appear, one person associated with the Herodian family in Palestine, 13:1. Because of James' preeminent stature, the sources for him turn out to be quite extensive, more than for any other comparable character, even for those as familiar to us as John the Baptist and Peter. In fact, extra-biblical sources contain more reliable information about James than about Jesus. There are also strong parallels between the community led by James and the one reflected in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is particularly true when one considers the relationship of James to the person known in the scrolls as the teacher of righteousness or righteous teacher. This book will build on the present debate concerning the Dead Sea Scrolls, presenting an alternative manner of viewing these documents. So many doctrines, allusions, and turns of phrase emerge from the material in the scrolls common to both traditions that the parallels become impossible to ignore. The research I am presenting here was originally completed under a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship at the Albright Institute in Jerusalem in 1985 and 6, the well-known American School, where the scrolls were first photographed in 1947. It was during the tenure of this award that the insights became clear to me that led to the struggle for open access to the scrolls and the final collapse of the scholarly elite controlling their publication and, even more importantly, their interpretation. But the subject of the person and teaching of James in the Jerusalem of his day is not only more important simply than his relationship to the interpretation of the scrolls, it is quite independent of it.